of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Yunho, the cold king of the city's underworld, sat behind a massive desk made of polished black stone. He kept his eyes fixed on his computer screen, watching numbers move up and down, and adjusted the heavy silver watch on his wrist. He acted as if he were completely alone in the room. He didn't even look up when Bari was shoved onto the plush carpet in front of him. To him, she was just the injured girl, a broken soul in a dirty, oversized hoodie with a dark bruise on her cheek, someone much too small to ever be a threat to a man of his power. "Get rid of her," Yunho said in a low, smooth voice, waving his hand as if he were shooing away a fly. "She has seen too much, but she is too weak to matter. Throw her back to the docks where you found her. She isn't worth the floor space she's taking up." He didn't give her a single glance, already turning his mind back to his next million-dollar business deal. He truly believed he was the only predator in the room, never imagining for a second that he was standing in the shadow of someone far more dangerous than himself. Then came the snap. Bari didn't cry, and she didn't beg for her life. Instead, her entire energy changed from a scared victim to a calm, deadly hunter in a single heartbeat. She reached into a hidden pocket deep inside her hoodie and, with a lightning-fast motion, slammed a black and gold dagger directly into the edge of his expensive mahogany desk. The blade was marked with the legendary Dragon King's seal, a symbol of a family even more powerful than Yunho's. The room went dead silent as an invisible girl stood up tall and straight, her eyes locking onto Yunho's with scary, frozen intensity. "Am I dismissed?" she whispered, her voice no longer trembling. The silver blade vibrated in the wood between them, revealing a secret identity that would turn Yunho's whole world into dust before the sun went down. Bari had spent years mastering the art of being a ghost. In the golden, warm light of Palazzo Nero, she moved with a grace that was designed to be ignored. She refilled crystal glasses and cleared expensive plates, her eyes always cast downward, noticing everything but revealing nothing. At 28, she was a shadow in a black uniform, a silent observer of the city's most dangerous deals. To the politicians and the criminals who dined there, she was just a tool, a piece of furniture that poured their wine. But Bari's silence was a choice, not a weakness. She was the daughter of Mitch Carlson, a man whose name once made the streets of Chicago tremble. Her father had been a legendary enforcer, a shadow warrior who lived by a single, deadly rule. The most dangerous weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you have, before he vanished into the fog of the past. He had trained her to see the world as a battlefield. He taught her how to read a man's intentions by the twitch of his jaw, and how to blend into a crowd until she became part of the walls. Beneath her quiet mask, Bari carried a heavy burden of knowledge. She understood the language of power, the subtle nods, the hidden threats, and the cold dialects of the underworld. She spoke the tongue of blood as fluently as the men who sat her tables, but she kept her lips sealed. She lived in a drafty apartment, worked double shifts, and embraced the practiced invisibility of a simple waitress to keep her father's enemies away. She wanted a life of peace, a life where her surname was just a memory. That peace was shattered on a Tuesday night, when the scent of expensive cologne and cold rain entered the restaurant. Yunho walked in, and the air in the room seemed to freeze. He didn't just walk. He commanded the space, his presence pushing against the walls like a physical weight. When his eyes, sharp and predatory, brushed over her, Bari felt a chill she hadn't felt since her childhood. He looked at her and saw a servant, a nobody with no history. He didn't see the daughter of a legend. He didn't see the predator hiding in the shadow of a girl. He sat at the corner table and began to speak, assuming his secrets were safe in a language he thought she couldn't understand. Yunho believed he was the king of the room, but Bari knew better. The game had changed, and the invisibility she had used as a shield was about to become her greatest weapon. Yunho could not stop staring at the black and gold dagger resting on his desk. The weight of the metal seemed to press down on the entire room, mocking his supposed authority. For the first time in his life, his glass-like eyes held a flicker of something other than boredom. It was obsession. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Bari had looked at him. not with the trembling fear of a victim, but with the cold, measured gaze of an executioner. He had ignored her, walked over her, and dismissed her as a broken bird. Yet she had managed to freeze his heart with a single, silent reveal. By the next morning, Yun-Ho had his best investigators scouring the city. He wanted every detail of her life, where she slept, what she ate, and who had given her that blade. But as the reports began to trickle in, a cold sweat broke across his brow. The deeper he dug, the more the world seemed to swallow her whole. According to the state's digital footprint, Barry Carlson did not exist. He found the records of a Barry Carlson who had lived a decade ago, but those files ended abruptly with a death certificate from a small-town hospital 10 years prior. The girl standing in his penthouse was a ghost, a phantom who had stolen a name and moved through the world without leaving a single trace. Then, a deeper search into his own family's classified archives brought up a name that turned his blood to ice: Mitch Carlson. The files described Mitch as a legendary traitor, a man who had been the right hand of the previous organization before supposedly selling out the family and vanishing. Yun-Ho's own mentors had taught him that Carlson was a coward who deserved to be forgotten. But looking at the dagger, the ceremonial mark of the high inner circle, Yun-Ho realized the history he had been taught was a lie. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, watching the rain wash over the city. He realized he hadn't just caught a simple waitress or an injured runaway. He had brought the daughter of a legend into the heart of his empire. Barry wasn't hiding from a world. She was waiting for it to notice her. He looked back at the empty chair where she had sat, a terrifying realization taking hold. He hadn't trapped a victim in his gilded cage. He had invited a ghost into his home, and now that the door was closed, he wasn't sure who was the prisoner and who was the guard. The penthouse was a cage of glass and gold. It was high above the city, but for Barry it was not a prison. She moved through the large, quiet rooms like a cat. She made no sound on the white marble floors. She did not look like a scared girl anymore. Her back was straight, and her eyes were sharp. She watched everything. She was a hunter in a beautiful house. Yun-Ho watched her from his dark office. He did not touch his drink. He had wanted to scare her. He wanted to make her talk. But now, he was the one who felt nervous. The power in the house was changing. He was the boss of the city, but in this penthouse, Barry was becoming the leader. Every time he tried to act tough, she hit him with words. She did not use her hands. She used secrets. While he sat at his big desk, she would walk by and whisper. She told him about a secret safe hidden behind a wall of books. She told him exactly how his father used to drink his tea. These were secrets that only a dragon could know. These were things that were never written in any book. The war between them was very quiet. Barry never screamed. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to use her dagger again. She just looked at the security cameras and smiled. She moved the small statues on his shelves into a special pattern. This pattern was an old signal that meant a king was about to fall. Every little thing she did made Yun-Ho feel less in control. Yun-Ho could not sleep. He stayed up all night thinking. He realized he wasn't guarding a prisoner. He was living with a judge. Barry was watching his every move. She looked at his expensive business calls as if they were silly games. By the third night, the injured girl had broken his pride. Yun-Ho was afraid to walk into his own living room. He owned the building, but Barry owned the air inside it. He was the one trapped, and she was the one with all the power. The dinner table was very large. It was covered in white cloth and heavy silver forks. Yun-Ho sat at the end of the table. He was trying to act like a powerful king again. He watched Barry across from him. She was eating slowly and calmly. The room was very quiet. It felt like a thin sheet of ice that was about to break. Yun-Ho wanted to make her feel small. He wanted to show her that he was the boss. "You talk about my father like you knew him," Yun-Ho said. His voice was cold and sharp. "But knowing how a man likes his tea is not the same as knowing his heart." Barry stopped eating. She put her fork down with a tiny click. The sound was loud in the quiet room. She looked up at him. For the first time, her eyes looked soft and sad. She leaned forward into the warm light of the candles. "He used to say that a king without a shadow is just a man standing in the sun," she said. She spoke the words in a very strange way. It was an old way of speaking from the docks of a faraway city. Yunho froze. The silver spoon in his hand fell and hit the floor. That way of speaking did not belong to a simple waitress. It was a secret language. It was only used by his father's most trusted friends. It was the private way of talking used by Mitch Carlson, the man they called the Great Shadow. The sound of those words hit Yunho like a punch to the chest. His mind rushed back 3 years. He saw a dark, quiet hospital room. He remembered the cold air. He saw an old man dying in a bed. That man was Mitch Carlson. Yunho was the one sent to kill him. He had watched the light leave the man's eyes to prove he was loyal to the Mafia. Yunho looked at Bari again. He did not see a broken girl anymore. He saw the face of the man he had murdered. She had the same nose and the same chin. The truth felt like a heavy weight in his lungs. He had not just found a girl with a secret knife. He had brought the daughter of his own victim into his house. He had killed her father. He was the one who ended the life of the man who taught her everything. Yunho's hand began to shake under the table. He was a killer, and she was a daughter seeking justice. He realized then that Bari was not just judging him. She was sitting across from the man who had stolen her life. The beautiful penthouse was now a house of ghosts. The blood debt between them was finally coming due. Yunho stood up slowly. His legs felt heavy. He walked across the room to a small safe hidden in the wall. He pressed his thumb against the scanner, and the door clicked open. He did not pull out money or a gun. Instead, he pulled out a small, old photograph. The edges were yellow and curled with age. He walked back to the table and placed it in front of Bari. The picture showed 2 young men standing in front of the sea. They both looked happy. One was Yunho's father, looking sharp and young. The other man was tall and strong, with a kind smile that Bari knew instantly. It was her father, Mitch Carlson. They weren't enemies in the photo. They looked like brothers. "My father loved yours," Yunho said. His voice was a broken whisper. "But the organization did not. They told me your father was a traitor. They told me he was selling our secrets to the police. To prove I was fit to lead, they gave me a test. They sent me to that hospital room 3 years ago. They told me to finish the job." Yunho closed his eyes tight. "I was the one, Bari. I was the last person your father saw. I ended his life to prove I was loyal to a lie." He waited for the explosion. He expected Bari to scream. He expected her to grab the silver knife and plunge it into his heart. He even wanted her to. He felt he deserved the pain. But the room stayed silent. Bari did not move. She picked up the photo and held it close to the candle flame. She wasn't looking at the faces. She was looking at the background. In the corner of the picture, carved into a wooden post behind the men, was a symbol. It was a dragon biting its own tail, the same dragon seal that was on her dagger. "Look at the date on the back," Bari said. Her voice was as cold as ice. Yunho turned the photo over. The date was from a time when both men were supposed to be at war. But the seal proved they were working together. Bari looked at Yunho, and for the first time, there was no hate in her eyes. There was only a dark, shared understanding. "You didn't kill a traitor, Yunho," she whispered. "And my father didn't run away. They were both whistleblowers. They were trying to stop the trafficking. The organization didn't send you to prove your loyalty. They sent you to kill the only man who had the evidence to destroy them. They used your hands to hide their crimes." The blood debt was real. Yunho had killed her father, but the lie was even bigger. They weren't enemies. They were both victims of the same monsters. And the real war was only just beginning. The sky turned a scary shade of orange. It was the first sign that Bari's world was ending. Yunho and Bari stood on the sidewalk. Their faces were white and covered in sweat from the heat. Palazzo Nero was melting. This was the restaurant where Bari had hidden for years. Now, it was a mountain of angry fire. The big glass lights were dripping like wax. The marble floors were cracking loudly. The smell of good food was gone. Instead, the air was thick with the choking smell of black smoke and death. Bari tried to run toward the doors. She screamed for her friends. She called for the cooks and the other girls who worked with her. They were the only family she had left. But Yunho's strong arms caught her. He pulled her back and held her tight. The roof fell down with a loud roar. It sounded like a giant beast dying. There was no one left to save. "The Becks did this," Yunho whispered. His voice was shaking with anger. "This is their work. They didn't just want to burn a building. They wanted to pull me out into the open." The Beck family were Yunho's worst enemies. They were cruel people who became rich by hurting others. Bari stopped fighting Yunho's grip. She looked at the ashes of her home, and her heart turned to stone. The war between her and Yunho felt small now. The secrets and the dagger did not matter as much. They were both standing in a much bigger trap. "They are more than just enemies, Yunho," Bari said. Her voice was cold and steady now. "My father was following them before he died. He wasn't just hiding from your family. He was tracking the money the Becks made from stealing people. They used the fight between our families to hide their crimes." Yunho looked at the fire and then at the girl in his arms. He realized the Becks had played them like toys. The Becks let Yunho kill Mitch Carlson to get rid of a witness. They let Bari live in a shack to keep her quiet. Now, they were burning the city to make sure the truth stayed dead. The boss and the girl were not enemies anymore. They were two players who finally saw the person moving the pieces. As the fire truck screamed in the distance, a new team was born in the smoke. They did not need a cage anymore. They had the same enemy. They would use the fire to burn the Beck Empire to the ground. The drive to the edge of the city was long and quiet. The smell of smoke from the fire was still stuck in their clothes. Bari led Yunho to a small storage unit. It was rusty and hidden behind a row of old, broken trucks. Her hands shook as she pulled a heavy key from a string around her neck. This was her father's last secret. She had guarded this key for years. She was waiting for the right moment to open the door. The lock clicked. The heavy metal door moved up with a loud, rusty groan. Yunho stepped inside. He expected to see boxes of stolen cash. He expected to find piles of illegal guns. He thought he would find proof that Mitch Carlson was a thief. But the small room was not filled with weapons. It was filled from floor to ceiling with paper. There were tall metal cabinets and stacks of black hard drives. Yunho picked up a folder. His eyes went wide as he read the pages. There were maps with red circles. There were bank records and lists of names. These were not the files of a bad man. These were the files of a hero. Bari's father had spent years writing down every bad thing the Becks did. He tracked every shipment. He wrote down every bribe. He followed the money that the Becks made by hurting innocent people. "He wasn't selling our secrets to the police," Yunho whispered. He felt a sharp pain in his chest. The truth was finally clear. He was gathering proof to destroy the people who were hurting others. He was trying to stop the bad men from the inside. Bari nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "My father didn't run away because he was scared, Yunho. He ran away to protect this room. He knew that if the organization found these files, they would burn them. He gave up his name and his life to keep this proof safe." Yunho looked at the mountain of paper. Then he looked at his own hands. For 3 years, he felt guilty for killing a traitor. But now he knew the truth was much worse. He had killed the only good man left in the city. Mitch Carlson was a man of honor who fought in the dark. The gift her father left was not a pile of gold. It was a weapon made of the truth. Yunho realized that his own family had been protecting the Becks. By killing Mitch, Yunho had accidentally helped the villains. He turned to Bari. His face was full of a new, fierce light. They had enough proof in this small, dusty room to break every criminal empire. The war was no longer about hate. It was about finishing the job her father started. The war did not start with the sound of guns. There were no explosions or car chases in the streets. Instead, the final battle started with the click of a button. Bari and Yunho sat in a dark room filled with computer screens. They were ready to use the Total Eclipse plan. This was the plan Bari's father had spent his whole life building. They took every map, every name, and every bank record from the storage unit and sent them to the world. They did not just tell the police. They sent the files to every news station and every federal agent at the same time. The truth spread like a digital fire. It moved faster than any bullet. While the city slept, the secrets of the underworld were being read by everyone. The Total Eclipse was working. It was pulling the monsters out of the dark and into the bright light of the sun. Criminal empires that had stood for decades began to fall in just a few hours. By sunrise, the city was filled with the sound of sirens. But these sirens were not for fire. They were for justice. Federal agents raided the Beck family's mansions. They found the hidden rooms and the stolen money that Mitch Carlson had written about. The powerful Beck leaders were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale with shock. They never thought a dead man's files could destroy them. But the fire did not stop there. Yunho's own organization began to crumble too. The files showed that his board of directors had been taking money from the Becks. They had been protecting the traffickers for years. One by one, the corrupt men who had told Yunho to kill Mitch Carlson were arrested. The weight of the truth was too heavy for them to carry. They couldn't hide behind their expensive suits anymore. Yunho stood in his office and watched the news. He saw the faces of his enemies on the screen. He saw his own empire falling apart. For the first time, he didn't feel like a king, and he didn't feel like a killer. He felt free. He had used his power to help Bari finish her father's work. The war was over, but no blood had been spilled that night. Bari stood next to him. She watched the names of the victims being saved on the television. Her father's name was finally being cleared. He was no longer a traitor. He was a hero. The injured girl and the cold boss had changed the world. They had used the truth to win a war that guns could never finish. The darkness was gone, and for the first time in years, they could finally see the light. The penthouse felt different now. It was no longer a palace of cold authority. It was a house of ghosts. The sun was beginning to rise over the city, casting long, pale shadows across the floor. In the center of the room stood a man named Chairman Park. He was the oldest member of the board. He was the one who had whispered the final order into Yunho's ear 3 years ago. He was the one who had signed her father's death warrant. He looked small and gray, stripped of his expensive titles and his bodyguards. Bari walked toward him. Her movement was slow and steady. She reached into her hoodie and pulled out the black and gold ceremonial dagger. The steel caught the morning light. She pressed the cold tip of the blade against the chairman's throat. This was the hidden weapon her father had given her. It was a tool of royal blood and ancient justice. For 10 years, she had dreamed of this moment. She had imagined the feeling of the blade sinking in. She wanted to hear him beg. The chairman's breath was fast and shallow. "Do it," he hissed, his eyes full of hate. "Finish the circle. Blood for blood. That is the only law we know." Bari's hand was perfectly still. She looked at the blade. Then she looked at Yunho. He was standing by the window. He did not try to stop her. He did not move to save his old mentor. He simply watched her with eyes that were tired of the dark. In that moment, Bari saw the cycle clearly. It was a wheel of fire and bone. If she killed this man, she became the next link in the chain. She would be a killer, just like the men who stole her father. She realized that killing the chairman would not bring Mitch Carlson back. It would not heal the bruise on her cheek or bring back the friend she lost at the restaurant. It would only make her heart as cold as the marble floor. Bari let out a long, shaky breath. She lowered the blade. With a sharp motion, she slammed the dagger into the mahogany desk. Not a kill, but to leave behind. "The circle is broken," she whispered. "I am not like you." Yunho walked over to her. He didn't look at the chairman. He looked only at Bari. He realized that they had a choice. They owned the buildings. They owned the banks. They could keep the money and start a new mafia, or they could burn the foundations and build something new, together. They decided to turn the blood-soaked wealth of the organization into a foundation. They would use the gold to build shelters for victims and schools for the forgotten. They would transform the dragon's hoard into a path for peace. The injured girl and the cold boss walked out of the office and into the light. They were no longer pawns or kings. They were just two people who had survived the night and were ready to start the day.